Okay, hello everyone. Welcome back to Montessori Thrive's Montessori Leadership Town Hall. You'll notice that you are all muted on entry. However, we really welcome all your comments and discussion. Donna has some time in her presentation for reflection, and we'd really like this to be an active discussion. So if you have anything to say, you can pop it in the chat or unmute yourself and you can talk to us directly. And with that, I'll give it over to our CEO, Donna.
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm really glad to be here with you today. Julia, can I ask you to monitor the chat for me?
Yes.
That would be fabulous. So you can raise your hand, you can type a message, whatever you need to do. And we do have, as Julia mentioned, some time for reflection and discussion built into the presentation because it makes it easier to work with it that way. So today we're going to be talking about numbers. I think for most Montessori school owners and certainly school leaders, that's a scary thing because we're not used to running a business. That's not what we signed up for. We didn't sign up to be business owners. We signed up to lead a school, or even better, to run a classroom. And those are completely different things. And sometimes we have to learn baptism by fire, just we do it because we have to. And other times we kind of push it aside and hope that it's not a big deal or important. But I think the bottom line is that we all look at the bank statement first. Typically, we look at how much cash we have, how much cash is coming in, how much cash is going out, and we run our schools like that until someone says, you know what, there are other things you need to know. If you're lucky enough to have a bookkeeper, yay, that's amazing. They are running the financials, but they're not actually looking and analyzing the numbers that give you information to make decisions, because numbers can help us do that. So this session today is not about turning heads of schools into accountants. Nobody wants to do that. It's about clarity, the kind that reduces stress, hopefully, supports decision-making because numbers are informative, and protects the mission that you care so deeply about. All right, next slide, please. Most Montessori leaders didn't choose this work because they love spreadsheets. Raise your hand if you love spreadsheets. Actually, I learned to love spreadsheets, I have to be honest, after 24 years. But I didn't when I started. I had never even used Excel. But when financial information is unclear, that's when leadership becomes reactive instead of intentional. And that's a problem because financial clarity isn't about control. It's about creating conditions where the mission can thrive and the leaders don't burn out. So clarity of the mission of your school, most of us are pretty clear of that. But how do we use numbers to enhance that? Same with your team. How many team members do we have? How many do we need? How many can we afford? And then how do numbers support you in living your life so you don't spend all of your time worrying, stressed out because are the numbers going to add up? Next slide. So what we're going to do today is reframe this for everybody. You don't need more numbers, you just need the right numbers. And you need to think of how they can help you make your decisions on a daily basis, a weekly basis, and an annual basis. Overwhelm as a school leader, I think, often comes from too much information without any context for it, right? We get numbers, particularly if you have an accountant and or a bookkeeper. You get numbers, but what do you do with those numbers? Do you even understand those numbers? That's the big question. Today is about identifying which numbers actually support leadership and letting go of the idea that you need to know everything to lead well, because you don't. And we're going to use three categories. Next slide. The three categories are every head of school needs to know numbers. You always need to know numbers that help you make decisions and numbers that help you have peace of mind. So we're going to be discussing the numbers in those categories.
Hey,
This,
Donna,
yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I don't see
Yeah.
any slides.
What?
I can see all the attendees, but no slides.
That's weird.
I don't know if anyone else is having the same problem, but it would be weird for one person to be having that problem. Oh,
I
that's weird.
I can see the slides. Are you on a phone or on a PC?
No, I'm on the computer. Okay, sorry to
Okay.
interrupt. I will figure it
No.
out on my side.
No. Is everybody else seeing the slides? Yes, no?
Okay, that's weird. All right,
Nicole,
thanks.
why don't you try like signing off and then I can readmit you and see if that works.
Okay, great. Sorry to interrupt. Thanks.
No, go. Thank you.
No, that's all right. So everybody else is seeing the slide presentation? Yes? Okay.
There are people in the chat that are saying they can see the slides.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. So the three categories again that we're going to discuss: what you should always know, what supports your strategic decisions, and what creates peace of mind for you. Slide 5. The beginning of section 1. What do you always need to know? So here's your leadership dashboard. If you know absolutely nothing else, these are the numbers you need to know. And I'll bet pretty much everyone on this call knows these numbers, except maybe the last one. These numbers don't tell the whole picture, but they tell you whether things are steady or require your attention. So enrollment percentage, filled seats versus capacity. I think that's probably the one statistic that almost every school leader and potentially everyone in the office can rattle off. They know, when you don't have full capacity, when you still have open seats, you know that. And you know what that number looks like. But you may not know the next two right off the top of your head. And the fourth one is the one that brings the biggest amount of anxiety. So monthly revenue, that's just how much cash comes in through tuition, through scholarships, however you collect funds. That's monthly revenue. What does that number look like? You probably have a pretty good idea in your head. Monthly expenses. If you have a budget, you probably know that. If you don't have a budget, we should talk about that because you need a budget. But that's something you probably have a pretty good idea about as well. Number 4, though, is one that if you have a smaller school, cash is a big deal. Because most of us learned to run our homes based on a checking account. Running a business on a checking account, which means just looking at what the balance is in the checking account, isn't useful. It might make you feel better in the moment, but it doesn't tell you how sustainable your business is. So knowing how much cash you have in reserve, which is really what this is the big number. If tomorrow something happened, how long could you go without 50% of your income, without 20% of your revenue? How long could you go? That's where cash reserves come in. And the target that you should probably look for is about 3 months. Now, I can tell you, you don't have to necessarily save all of that, because it's possible that you may get lump sum payments and they're sitting in an account. Those become useful in an emergency. You don't touch them unless there's an emergency, but they're sitting there. So saving 3 months is a great goal, but that's not the only way to have cash reserves. The one thing that I can tell you is if you have 0 cash reserves or 0 left over, that's when your anxiety at night will come in. I don't know about you guys, but at 3 o'clock in the morning, I was waking up and going, oh my God, how am I going to make payroll some years? When things were bad or things were tough, that's how I felt. And it was always at 3 o'clock in the morning that I'd be having that panic attack. So slide 7, enrollment and revenue signals. I don't think it's a secret that empty seats create stress, frequently not silent stress, even because we're talking about enrollment actively. We're talking about it with leads, we're talking about it with parents, asking them if they know anybody, and we're talking about it with our admin staff if we have them, because we all need to be working on that. But sometimes it's quiet because a school can feel really, really busy. You can almost be full and still be under enrolled for what you need. Because if you don't know how many students you need to make your ends meet, that becomes a stress point. So this slide is about visibility, knowing whether enrollment and revenue are supporting the school or are they quietly draining your energy. Let's talk about what each of these is. And these are numbers that are easy to figure out, easy to calculate, and really important to know. So capacity versus enrollment. How many seats are available by age? Again, you probably know that. You probably have that number in your head. Your tuition run rate. That's an interesting number. To calculate your run rate, you take your monthly tuition revenue and you multiply it by 12. And that's your annualized, using today's number, runway. This is how much we are scheduled to make, to bring in over the course of the year if nothing changes, if we don't add a student and we don't lose a student. It tells you what today's enrollment can support. How many staff members? Can it meet all of your facility costs? Are you going to be able to have elegant snacks, or are you going to have to cut back on snacks? What is that going to look like? So you can lead with clarity. You're also going to be able to tell, do we need to raise tuition? Because if your run rate is consistently too low, you need to look at whether you're charging enough for the product you're delivering. Attrition is twofold, really. Families leave at the end of the year or the end of the semester because family situations change, right? But attrition also happens at the end of a 3-year cycle or just before the end, like right before kindergarten. That's such a killer. And we need to be thinking, what do those numbers look like? So looking back at the past 5 years, if you have that data, that's really helpful. When do people leave? What does that look like? What percentage of my kindergartners don't return for the kindergarten year? What percent of my students don't return for elementary? And because that's not only going to inform what kind of cash you have available, what your budget's going to look like for next year and the year after, but it's also going to help you decide, how do I market? How do I talk to the parents that I have? What kind of parent education do I need to do? Next slide, please. So expenses and cash. This is an interesting number because this is where pressure usually comes up. You start looking at how big your payroll is, right? Oh my God, it's a big number. And you don't need to manage those line items to lead well, but you do need signals that will help you identify, am I where I should be? And payroll percentage and cash timing are often where pressure really builds. When you understand those signals, then your anxiety actually decreases. Payroll creep. You've probably heard that term. If not, it basically means how much is your payroll going up? Okay, so let's go back to talking about payroll creep. In a typical Montessori school, a humming Montessori school, you would typically see the payroll expenses, and that includes bonuses, it includes benefits, it includes insurance, it includes everything that has to do with the cost of your employees, the employee costs. Typically runs between 68 and 72% of revenue. That's really amazing. That's a huge, big number. But it looks like that because, and you'll find if you talk to people who are experts in the field, they'll tell you, oh, no. Payroll should be below 50%. Well, that may be true in daycare where you're hiring babysitters, but in Montessori, we're not hiring babysitters. We're hiring people with master's degrees. We're hiring people who are extremely trained and who do this because this is their career. We don't pay them the same as people pay in a daycare. And so our percentages run high. If you start to see that you're creeping above 70% of revenue for your operating revenue, then what you're seeing is I need to rethink, can I afford to give raises this year? Or do I need to give a tuition hike that's bigger than I expected? Because you can't get those out of alignment. I'm sure all of you have known schools who didn't raise tuition for a couple of years. It's disastrous because everybody else is getting an increase. Your electricity goes up, your water costs go up, your food costs go up, and your payroll costs go up. If you're not raising tuition at least as much as those are going up, you're losing money every year. So watching that percentage, and it's easy to calculate because it's your payroll total divided by your total revenue. It will tell you immediately where you're falling in the typical range. Your facilities costs, darn it all, facility costs are really high. Whether you're rent or mortgage, doesn't matter. But utilities add on to that, maintenance adds on to that. Facility costs are very high. And you can't really change that. It's not like you can go to your landlord or your mortgage broker and say, hey, you know what? I can't pay the mortgage this month. You can't do that. So just like payroll, those are numbers you need to be paying attention to in terms of ratio to what revenue is coming in. Operating reserves, that's an interesting number as well. We talked about cash reserves. Specifically calling them operating reserves means that's money you don't touch unless there's an emergency. That is not money set aside for scholarships. That is not money that has been paid in advance. Operating reserves are cash that you have saved for a rainy day. And many schools don't have that safety net. Talking about stress. But it's vital to aim for a 90-day reserve. And the only way to do that, if you're feeling cash strapped, is a little bit at a time. We all know what it looks like to budget for our home. It's the same kind of thing for your school. So let's reflect on this a bit. Based on what we've talked about so far, which of these numbers, if you knew it clearly today, would immediately reduce your stress? Drop it in the chat. And notice if one number feels heavier than the others, because that's usually the one that you need more clarity about. And I can't see the chat, so I'm relying on you, Miss Julia. Or unmute. If you'd rather just talk, please just talk.
We've got a couple people in the chat. Diane says operating reserves. Nicole says operating reserves is the most stress reducing, but I know it.
Anybody else? I feel the same way, by the way. When I was running my school, operating reserves were a huge, big deal to me. Huge, because I knew that I needed to be able to sustain the school if something happened. And that number was way too small to make that happen in many, many, many years. I didn't make it a priority. And so I struggled. I'm the one that was constantly worrying about it. I couldn't let on, but I was the one worrying about it. So I added to my own stress. So let's move on to section 2, decision numbers. We'll be offering some suggestions here.
Hey,
Slide
Donna,
11. Yes, go
uh,
ahead.
before you get to the slide, I just want to make a comment here that with regard to the staff salary, staff expense and the revenue,
Yes,
we've been lucky enough to basically, and I watch that every year, we've been lucky enough to stay around like 50, 55%.
that's
Uh,
fantastic.
and not that we basically been cutting corners on teacher salary. I mean, we are quite competitive with other Montessori schools. So we've been lucky in that sense, and because I watch that very clearly, and because that comes into play, particularly when you're at the end of the year, you're looking at tuition planning and salary planning, right?
Absolutely.
And how do you manage that so that you guys, you mentioned yourself. So I just want to share that with you.
I appreciate that, Wally. You know, when you've led a school as long as you have, you get those numbers in your head. They are important numbers. And you know, the interesting thing is those numbers fluctuate based on the programs you have, right? Because infant and toddler are very high cost programs because of the ratio between adult and child. And that affects how your revenue percentage is calculated, right? It is very much an influencer. Can your other programs carry it's not a shortfall necessarily, but the burden of a very low margin, a very low difference between costs and revenue in those classes where the children are very young. As you get into primary and elementary, it's a little bit easier. I know my break even number, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, was 14 students in a primary out of a 30 student class. That's a pretty comfortable number. But if you don't know those numbers, it is stressful. And I'm really glad that your numbers are so low. That has to feel good. That
Yeah,
has to.
historically, basically, our primary program has been the moneymaker,
Mhm.
basically, and we have been able to stay typically around 28 per class, which is really a high number
Right.
to be with. And the thing that I won't say is a drain, but the struggle we have financially is the elementary program.
Mhm. Yeah, I can believe that, because you have to have your teachers are more expensive, and I was just about to talk about that right now because it is. You have to think about what does it cost per classroom, and elementary is frequently expensive because the staff costs more. You know, there are fewer of them, and they demand a higher price, and you don't always have a full class, so it can be very much a struggle, and that's what we're talking about now. So why is it hard if we're not full? If we're already full, I'm sorry, if we are full, why does it still seem hard? And that's one of the reasons. Full classrooms don't always equal healthy margins. And understanding that classroom level economics really helps to soothe that and helps you to understand whether or not the program is sustainable, because sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's not. So break even per classroom was one number I always knew, because the minute I figured out how comforting it was to know what that number was, that was the one I paid attention to all the time. Again, we ran a class of 30 children in primary, and the break even was 14. That included admin overhead, facility overhead, operating expenses for the business overhead, all of that shared out across the classrooms. I still only needed 14 students to break even in that class. That means that I can have a really low enrollment and still be okay. But if I have a class that's not full in toddler or primary, or I'm sorry, in toddler or infant, or if I have a class that's not full in elementary, the expenses of that program may actually end up being carried by the primary. So being aware of what all those numbers are and figuring out what the overall cost per classroom is, figuring out the balance, the medium point there, also is helpful. So to get to that break even, all you have to do is take your total cost per class and divide it by the average tuition per student. You don't need to get nitpicky here. It doesn't have to be exact. But that break even enrollment is what will help you sleep at night. Knowing exactly what that number is in each class so that you are covering your expenses. Does it help you add to your operating reserves? No. Does it help you if something goes dramatically wrong? No. But can you make payroll and pay the rent next month? Yes, because you know that. So let's look at staffing and ratios. Staffing decisions are deeply values-based, wouldn't you say? We think about what we want the classroom to look like and how we want to implement Montessori. Some schools they adhere very closely to the one lead, one assistant model. Others are much more concerned about what the state licensing may say. And others are, no, I don't want it to be that. I want to be able to say to a parent, our ratios are 1-5 or 1-6. Whatever the case may be, it's based on how you value the program and the classroom. But they also have financial consequences. When staffing economics aren't visible, when you don't know those numbers, like Wally was talking, leaders are the ones who end up carrying the emotional weight of not knowing and not being certain that things are sustainable. So understanding your staffing costs help you make key decisions then about your staffing. Who to hire, how many to hire, can I even afford to hire? What can you or should you pay? It can even tell you whether a program will ever be profitable. And that may not be a requirement, but you should know. And when you make the decision to allow it to be a break even or even a loss, sometimes in infant, it ends up a loss, depending on how many students you have. It's an informed decision that you go into consciously. It's when we make decisions based on a hunch that we start to really get worried. And that's when the stress and the anxiety builds. We shoot for about 30% for a primary classroom of 25 students, meaning your actual versus ideal ratio and cost of staff by classroom. We want the actual payroll cost to be no more than the 30% of the revenue of that classroom, not total. And we're not talking about the total numbers. We're talking about per classroom. The number will be higher in elementary or adolescent because salaries are higher, which is what we just talked about. And it will be substantially higher in an infant or toddler classroom. Again, ratio plays a role in that. Cost of turnover is also something we need to consider. How much does it cost to hire a new staff member, particularly a trained teacher? Recruiting costs, training costs, and the cost that's hard to identify but is vitally important. When we lose a staff member, a lead in a classroom, what does that cost us in our reputation, right? That when we have disruption in the classroom, parents get upset. We have to train them in a whole new way. It is a difficult situation. So there is some cost to that because it brings risk in. It brings a risk into what you're doing. Admissions and tuition health. We deal with enrollment all the time. Most of you work with us on enrollment most of the time. But it's not supposed to feel like a panic. And for most of us, it does at some point. When admissions data is clear, then you can respond clearly and with clarity and not with urgency. Tuition health is about dignity for the school, the staff, and families. It's about ensuring that the money is going to come in, that's required to keep running the program that you want to run, the program that is your vision enacted. What numbers are important? Well, conversion flow. What the heck is conversion flow? If you'd have said that to me 20 years ago, I'd have looked at you as if you had three heads. Conversion flow. What I really know is how many people come in for a tour and then how many enroll. That's what conversion flow is. Somebody applies for a tour, and then they come in for the tour, and then they finally enroll. What does that number look like? What percentage of people who walk through the door actually enroll? Do you know why? That's also an important thing to know. But knowing the actual number is important. Keeping track of those numbers is important. When was the last time your school did a market survey of all of the schools within a 7 to 10 mile radius? Because that's pretty typically a draw for a Montessori school, particularly in a large city area. You need to know what options the parents have. And you don't just need to know what Montessori options they have, because if you're in a state that has free pre-K or free kindergarten, or God forbid, the new free threes, you're going to be competing with those other programs that are not Montessori. So you need to know how much is it going to cost for a parent to go there. What are their hours? What do they look like? How do you set yourself apart? But that tuition number is the one you want to ask yourself about, because Montessori schools are better. We know that. We know that the result that children get, the product that comes out of a Montessori school, the amazing person that little person becomes because they were given that Montessori experience, that is valuable. And you need to ensure, each one of us needs to ensure that we are valuing our product more than daycare. So if your rates are about the same as the daycare down the street, you're undervaluing yourself. I always figured I wanted to be in the top 5% of tuition. I would rather give a discount or a scholarship to one or two families than undercharge 80 families. So how your discounts and your scholarships play into that number, because you need to know what percent of revenue comes from those, particularly if you're getting scholarships from outside organizations. Are you getting scholarships from a state organization? Is there any other kind of scholarship available? In Arizona, we had tuition tax credit scholarships. All of those things are things that the rules can change on year after year. And you never know, am I going to consistently get this money next year? If a family's on a scholarship, particularly if they're on a big scholarship, and that scholarship goes away, will I lose that family? So keeping track of what percent of your revenue is coming from discounts, staff discounts, multiple sibling discounts, all of those things, and what's coming from scholarships outside of your organization is important to know.
Donna, I have two comments on
Yes,
this slide.
please.
Conversion flow. This is something that we had a hard time. I mean, we have the CRM and all that, but we have a hard time extracting the data. And again, we are not going to discuss this in this call because it's a different call, but I think maybe we can follow up later on, because I think we have discussed that with other members of your team. So that's one comment. Second thing is that when you talk about survey, the market survey, uh, it is virtually impossible to find out what the other Montessori schools in the area are doing, because I mean, per advice of Nido Marketing, you don't share your tuition anymore on the website, right?
You know
So
what? You're absolutely right. Going to a website and finding out what it costs is hard, because everybody's figured out that it's a really
correct.
good way to get information.
True.
So I don't know what anybody else does, but at Aldea Montessori, I would recruit two parents and I'd give them a month's free tuition if they would go to 3 other Montessori or other types of schools in the area and come back with a tour packet.
Interesting.
because I needed that information.
Yeah.
Now, I will also tell you that I was then and still feel like I am a bit of a maverick, honestly, Wally. When I opened my school in 2001, I went to every other recognized school because I was trained AMI, so I wanted to get to know the AMI schools in my area. I went to every single one of those schools and I said, I'm about to open a school. I'm not right down the street from you. I only need 10 new students every year. I don't consider us competitors, but I want to know about your program and I want us to work together. And I literally was referring people to other schools all the time, all the time. And they were referring people to me because we formed an alliance instead of a competitive relationship. So I could call them and say, hey, what are you going to charge this year? We're thinking about this. Where are you? Are you going to go up a certain percentage, or, are you concerned about enrollment? And we literally would have those conversations. Because I believe that I want children to be in a Montessori environment. And if it's not mine, that was okay. So if there's a better Montessori school out there, I don't think there is. But if you think there is, then go. I want you to choose my school because it's the best place for your child, not because it's the only place or it's right down the street. I want you to really love being here. And I would say that to parents because then I could go to other schools and say, hey, I just referred this student. Did they come see you? So I'm a little bit different in that regard.
Yeah, that's really great. I think the only, for your information, the only school in the area that still shares on the website the tuition is Casa Montessori.
That's where I started my
That's what you might, yeah, I thought you
training.
might find it interesting.
That's where I started my training.
I know.
Yeah. So, yeah, I love Casa. Still good friends with them. Miss Flo. Yeah. Anyway, so keeping track of enrollment numbers is important. And Wally, you are so experienced. No matter what we discuss, I know you're aware of it. And I appreciate that you share because it's really helpful and it gets other people thinking about other questions and comments. So please don't stop. All right, so reflection. Where am I making decisions based on pressure instead of clarity? Pressure is things that seem urgent, and clarity is all about being calm in how you make a decision. Anybody? New programs, new staff, changes in the way you do things.
I could tell you one that I haven't made the decision yet, but some of our classrooms, we have 5 children's house classrooms. And with licensing, we can have 26 students in 3 of them, and we can have 17 students in the other 2. So I have in the 26 classroom a teacher who is like, why can't I just have 20? So I only have, we only have to have 2 adults. And like, well, because those other 6 children bring in so much money, right? Like it doesn't wash. And
Right.
if I could blow out walls, everybody would have 26 children. And if we weren't in Washington, I'd put 30 children in there. So
right.
It's, trying to like hold that pressure back. And I come from a state that's, I worked at AMI schools and we had over 30 children in the classrooms because licensing didn't bother us. And everybody who's here has only worked here. So they think they need extra adults all the time. So that's an interesting, I'm always like, well, I want to make the staff happy, but I know the children need less adults, right? Like you're going back and forth all the time. So that's just in my head. Like that's the one that's always sitting in my brain for the teachers.
I literally took and shared my budget with the staff at one point when they were saying stuff like that. And I said, let's just run the numbers. Our total revenue is, I don't know, at the time, maybe $650,000 because we were fairly small. For every student, we add $15,000, whatever that number was at the time. So if I take 5 students out of your classroom, that's $75,000 of revenue. That could be in your salary, that could be in new materials, that could be being invested in growing, but I can't because you're not interested in having the maximum number of students based on our training that we know is the best. And I didn't do it to one person. I did it to the whole staff. I was like, guys, you need to understand these numbers. It's not one student. It's $15,000. It's not 5 students. It's $75,000 that I can't spend on you. That's a lot. It's interesting. It's not the only way to approach it, but it is one, because it became incredibly transparent. When they looked at those numbers, they went, oh,
Yeah.
oh.
Donna, I have a quick question for Nicole.
Sure.
So I'm very little and very new, and I'm looking to expand to a place where I might not have licensing give me the same number of children in both spaces. As far as like not ratio, but total number of children that are be permitted in each room.
Capacity in that classroom.
Yes,
fire capacity, basically.
That's the word. So have you considered giving each teacher their salary based more on the number of children that they have in their care? Because it does actually equal more work to have more parent-teacher conferences and tracking more, things. So I was just wondering, do you pay them a little differently for that disparity, or?
No, in fact, before I started here, they had this huge, like, everything needs to be equitable. So our toddler teachers are paid the same as our elementary teachers. They're all on the same pay scale. So there's no difference anywhere because that's what they all decided they wanted before I got here. Now, one of my projects this next year is reevaluating all of that because for other reasons, but because I do understand that would make sense. So
I can hear that whole thing happening, and I'm just wondering what journey you already went through, and maybe I can shorten up my journey a little, having learning from your experience. Thank you for sharing.
Of course.
Wow, that's a tough road, because there's a very big difference in how the preparation for the classroom, not the physical environment, but the lesson planning and the thought processes and everything between a toddler lead and an elementary lead.
Yeah, there is.
I mean, monumental, not just a little, huge.
Mm-hmm.
That's not equitable. See,
right.
Fair's not fair.
Right.
Man, I don't envy you.
At our school, by the way, we do not pay the same salary at different levels. For example, toddler, primary, and elementary, we don't do that. We have different pay scales for them. But I think in terms of what the point that was brought up here, can you pay, for example, at the same level, like primary, for example, based on the number of students? That's a really a tough one, because it will create a issue of morale between teachers in the same level. Like primary, one classroom is getting paid more, and the teacher is getting paid less. So that's something that we have stayed away from, because that can create a whole other set of problems in terms of how cohesiveness of the environment of the teachers and how they feel.
Yeah, and I wonder, just thinking about, I don't want to stick on this topic because I'm sure Donna has more to share, but say it's the 26th classroom and we only end up enrolling it to 18, then what? Do I cut her salary because we didn't get enough students in there, right? Like then the 17 person's making less than the person who's supposed to be 26, but it didn't work out by the time we got to September. I don't know. It's a lot to think about.
Yeah. Yeah, no. I would never base a teacher's salary on the number of students in the classroom. Because yes, it is more work to have 26 children than 17, but that's not their fault. That is your decision to have a classroom that's smaller. Now, you're limited by the size of your building, but it was your choice, not theirs. Right? So you're punishing them for the fact that your building is too small.
Yeah, and maybe if they have extra time, there's other things they can help with.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I would be really careful about basing it on the number of students in the classroom. And if enrollment isn't good, again, here's what I did once, many, many years ago, and it actually was really effective for about 5 years. I told them I'd offer them a bonus. I'd pay them $100 for every student who re-enrolled. Because I have the most control over new enrollments, but they have the most control over re-enrollments. And I was particularly interested in the ones who re-enrolled for kindergarten. I'll even pay you slightly more for that if they re-enrolled for the kindergarten year. So there are ways around that, and there are possible things that you can do, but they really they play such a big role in who stays and who leaves. And giving them some ownership of that is really powerful.
One thing we do, by the way, one thing we do is teachers who retain students, and also, for example, how many of them retained like the third year, or how many of them sent the primary to elementary. Based on that, what we do is we do give them bonuses, not part of salary. It doesn't affect salary, but we give them bonuses. And again, it doesn't have to be announced publicly. And
right,
so
no.
they feel they're being rewarded that way.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. That's exactly what I was saying, Wally. That's such a great thing to do because it gives them ownership of their classroom.
Right.
It gives them a sense that they're contributing and that's being recognized. I love that. So let's move on to peace of mind because I think sustainability is a big deal. So let's just go directly to slide 16. If the leader isn't okay, the school isn't either. I wish I could hold everyone's hand and say, you may be the most senior member of your staff. You may be the biggest leader. You are the biggest role that your school has. But you have to be really careful how you view that. There are two ways that often gets viewed. One, I don't pay myself because I can't afford to pay myself. That's new school talk. If you've been open more than 2 years and you're still there, we should talk about what that looks like because you need to get paid. If the leader isn't okay, the school isn't either. Leader compensation has to be planned into the budget. Does the leader have to make more than everyone else? Well, that depends on your situation. If you're a nonprofit school that can go out and afford to hire someone at a very big salary, go for it. I was a private school and I was small, and I will tell you right now, I made less than all of my lead teachers for 24 years because I knew that I didn't have a school without them. I wanted to invest in them. And I also knew that at the end of the day, if it was a private school, and ours was, that if there was money left over, I had the opportunity to take a distribution. So my salary was always lower than theirs. But that's a choice that you get to make. But you have to take a salary. You have to take a salary, because otherwise you will burn out. You will feel it's not fair. No matter how much you love what you do, you get to a place where it's not fair because you're devoting so much of your time. Knowing your net margin, the net income versus the annual revenue, allows you to feel comfortable that there's enough money to pay you. Figure yourself in, look at what you are projecting you bring in, what you're projecting the costs will be, including payroll, including you, including benefits, including everything. And then divide that number and make it into a percentage. The money is, the net margin is the money that's left over after all expenses are paid. That's your breathing room. A healthy a school runs 5 to 10%. 5 to 10% net margin. If you're running less than 5%, you're surviving, but you aren't sustainable because you, the leader, will end up feeling overworked, overburdened, and incredibly stressed. So that's the number you're really, really looking for to believe that you are sustainable for long term. Think of that margin as how you protect your mission, how you protect the staff, and how you protect the families. That's the money you can reinvest. It's not money for you to take out. I can't see you all, or I would ask you to raise your hand if you got into this because you thought that owning a Montessori school would make you rich. I'm assuming none of you would raise your hand because that's all we do it for. We do it for the children. We do it for the families. We do it for the community, and we do it because we love Montessori. Yes, I want to make a decent income, but I'd rather reinvest and make sure my school is sustainable before I do that. Next slide. Do you know where you're vulnerable? I'm working on that right now for Montessori Thrive. What would happen if the one key person on our staff disappeared tomorrow? Who's the key person on your staff? Is it you? If you leave, if you have to go out because you're sick or there's a family emergency for 30 days or 60 days, who runs the school? Will it keep running? Do you only have one lead at any one age? Because that is a vulnerability, right? Something happens to the lead in that classroom. Who fills in for an extended period of time? And what does that look like? It's important to understand these things because they keep us up at night, right? Having a backup plan is really, really a super smart thing to do because you need to know, what am I going to do if this happens? What am I going to do if that happens? But you have to articulate what those vulnerabilities are. So that single point dependency, who's the key person that you cannot live without? Probably, or maybe not, heard that in big business, they say, find your key person and then replace them. Because you don't ever want to be reliant on one person. If it's you, it's time to start delegating and sharing more. Expense ratios. So the fixed versus flexible expenses. When we first opened Aldea, my husband, who was a Harvard MBA, promised me he would run the business if I ran the classroom, the parents, all the other stuff. Great. Well, we didn't have very many students. We had 4 actually when we opened. Only had 7 at the end of the first year. And it grew exponentially after that. But that first year, I think he sat down with me and yelled at me almost every single night. Why? Because he was looking at the pennies I was spending on snack, on paper, on crayons, whatever. And he didn't understand that my fixed expenses, that my variable expenses, the consumables that he was talking about, even if I cut 100% of them out, it would not have fixed our budget because our fixed expenses, payroll and and facility were something we couldn't change. And that's what you need to look at. What does it take to sustain those things? Knowing that you have enough money for those fixed expenses and understanding that you can cut back on snack all you want, and it's not really going to make a huge change in your budget. Staffing, facilities. Can you save money on utilities? Can you save money? And God forbid, right now, I think we need to add a third. Based on the last 3 years, I think insurance is the third biggest thing, particularly liability. If you live in the state of Texas, bless you, because even getting liability insurance is tough, but it's outrageously expensive for what we do. So if your budget is feeling strapped, you can't cut those costs. So how much can you actually adjust? Understanding that is important. Time is a financial resource. Oh my gosh. Have you all figured out what your time is worth? You should do that. How much are you worth per hour? How much time do you spend on admin versus leadership? If you're like me, it's almost 100% in admin, not in leadership. Leadership is looking at the long term. It's meeting parents. It's really buckling down on who you're partnering with and who's enrolled and how you're going to keep that up and the message and vision you're sharing to the community. Leadership time has value. When heads of schools spend their energy on work that doesn't require their role, something else quietly suffers. And frequently it's relationships, or even more importantly, rest, being able to sleep at night. One of the biggest drains on a leader's time is doing things that someone else could do. I am the best example of what not to do. Wasn't that I was cheap, it was just faster, easier, quicker, more satisfying to do it myself, whether it was loading the dishwasher or plunging a toilet or cutting the grass. It was faster to get something done if I did it myself. What an incredible drain on my energy that could have been used to solve so many other problems. So delegating the things that you don't need to do saves not only your energy, but also your time that can be invested in doing other things. When you're spending your time on anything else, you begin to feel like, why did I open a school? Why did I do this? And I will tell you that most of you have seen my video. Most of you have heard my story. The reason I couldn't turn my school over to a Montessorian, the reason I sold my school and it closed, is because I did it all. I tried to do it all and I made it look hard. So all these amazing people I was grooming that could have easily run the school basically said to me, no, I don't want to work that hard. I don't want to be here every day, even on the weekends, fixing things. I don't know how to do what you do. I made it look hard. If I had delegated those things, if I had brought in specialists to do certain things, someone would have taken over the school and Aldea Montessori would still be open. I made it look hard. So be aware of where you're using your time. So here's my next question then. If my role were truly sustainable, if I was using my time wisely and on the things that were important, what would look different in my week? What would look different in your week if you were spending your time on things that really, really mattered? Anybody?
I would be in the classroom observing.
And you know what? That feeds your soul.
And I really miss it.
Mm-hmm. I bet you do. I miss it today. I know what you mean. I've done that. Anybody else? Okay. Well, we are a little bit over time. If you can stay, there are 2 more slides. That's it. But this one is your one-page dashboard, right? If you can keep track or at least be aware of these basic numbers, then that's enough. That's really enough. Your enrollment percentage, your revenue versus expenses, and how many months of cash you think you have. Your payroll percentage, the revenue per classroom, and attrition. Those are important, but not vital. And then you really want to sleep well at night. Keep track of your margin, your compensation, and how it ties to your well-being and your enrollment outlook. I kept this intentionally simple because you don't need complexity to lead. You just need consistency. But if you can keep track of these 6 things, you will sleep better at night. I can promise you that. What I don't want you to think is that we're talking about micromanaging numbers. I don't want you to fear your numbers. And this is not accounting. Trust me when I say this is not accounting. Don't talk to me about accounting. I get lost. But what it is about stewardship of your school, really taking ownership of the responsibility to ensure it has a sustainable future. That's what numbers can help us see. And it helps you to be the calm leader that you want to be, because it shows when you're stressed. It shows when you're sleep deprived. You can't make your best decisions. You can't show up your best self. You can't be the prepared adult when stress and lack of sleep are how you live. I know that's how I lived for 20 years, but I'm advising you that it's not the best way to live. You end up hurting yourself. You end up hurting your school in the long run. This work that we're talking about, it's not about fear. It's about stewardship. Caring for your school, caring for the people, and caring for yourself.
It's not unusual that the head of schools get burnt out in about 10 years, the max. You know,
Yep,
it's very hard.
it is. It's very hard, which is why Montessori Thrive has switched direction, because I am convinced there are ways that we can support. We at Montessori Thrive, but also we as the Montessori community can support each other and figure out better ways to do things that will help us not feel so overwhelmed. Because there are people running big businesses that don't feel that way. And I think part of our issue, Wally, is we care so very much that we want it to be so special, and that ends up being to our own detriment because we try to do it all.
I just want to make one statement, and Tom talk about stress. And I do not know how we can relieve that, but again, we don't have to discuss it today. But the biggest point of stress for us over the years has been essentially losing valuable teachers. And as you said, talk about it on like a choke point. I mean, there is in our case we have if we lose one lead teacher, it may just be the end of the whole program. I mean, that's a lot of stress to deal with.
It is. This is not necessarily the time or the place, but you have brought up a really interesting point. One of my resolutions for the new year is that I want to develop either a database or a new resource, something where Montessori teachers can register. Not schools go in and post an ad, though technically you could do that on something like this. I want Montessori school teachers to register so that there's a vehicle that says, here I am, here's who I am, and I'm looking for something new. Right now we're doing the opposite. We're out chasing who? Nobody that we know. And people who are looking for jobs have to figure out which place there's an ad that might be useful to them. There's got to be a way we can connect those two things. I'm looking for something new. We're looking for you. And that's one of the things I really want to focus on this year within our company is how do we get there? And then how do we get people trained? How do we get people trained? How do we make it exciting to be trained again? Because it used to be. So, yeah. You're not wrong, Wally. We hear that all the time. So, well, I know we kept you over. I hope this was helpful. We put together a worksheet that you can use that will help you. And I think, were you going to drop that in chat, Julia? Or how do you want to handle that? Just to kind of walk through what we've talked about, and you don't have to use it, but if it's useful to you.
Tomorrow I'll email that to all the registrants on the Zoom call, and then I'll also have it with this recording, the presentation slides on our community page, and the recording will be on our YouTube channel tomorrow to rewatch.
This lady is efficient. Can you tell this? Wow. Okay, fantastic. So it's a financial clarity reflection worksheet. It's the beginning of the year. It's a good time to think about it. And it's right before enrollment, which is another good time to think about it. So you will have access to that. And I appreciate everyone that came today. Are there any questions or comments that, before we shut ourselves down here, that anybody would like to make? And you can stop sharing anytime. So. Why can't I see the Zoom call? Did everybody leave? Yes.
We're here.
Just can't see anybody.
Thanks, Donna. I appreciate all the information. It was really helpful.
I hope so. I know it's a lot of numbers, but if you're a new school, getting used to those numbers at the beginning is nice. If you are an existing, maybe older school, making sure you're comfortable with those numbers is important. So thank you all for being here.
Donna, I want to share one thing that Dolores said in the chat.
Yes.
Let's scroll up. She said, "Thank you, Donna. This has been extremely helpful. I wish I had received a presentation like this one when I took over the whole school administration 15 years ago."
Trust me, I wish I had received a presentation like this. My husband, after 5 years of saying he would run the school, he resigned. He quit. He said, "This isn't fun anymore. I'm not going to do it." And he quit. And I ended up having to do it. And I learned the hard way, right? The school of hard knocks. And I learned it so well that now I can talk circles around him. So it's possible, but it's the hard way. For sure. All right. Well, again, thank you all for being here. What's up next week?
We have another guest speaker next week. We are back with Isabella Kai next Thursday. Yep, so stay tuned for that topic. We're excited to have her, and we are doing this every Thursday during the school year, so please join us again.
Yeah, everybody needs to come to the Isabella Kai Town Hall because the most important, she just did some research that informs us all on marketing that is a completely different direction than we thought it should go. So you want to be there. You don't want to miss it. It's going to be great. All righty then. Yeah, Diane, you're using Montopia. I'd love to hear what you think of it privately, and we can get together. We can.
Bye.
All right. Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you, everyone. Thank you, Donna.
Thanks for staying. All right. Bye.